Hi, so today I want to talk about an interesting idea of these ancestor simulations, if you heard about them. So, two basic things that we start with, and there are distinctions between the two. One would be the simulation hypothesis that maybe you heard, and this basically says really simply, we are living in a simulation. Then there is a different thing that is called the simulation argument, and it's not exactly the same thing. The simulation argument proposes three different possibilities and says that one of these must be true. So the first possibility is first we must define the concept of technological maturity. So technological maturity is when a civilization advances far enough that they leave behind all their petty primitive stuff and they advance into high technology of energy and abundance and artificial intelligence, and especially the ability to create simulations of their own past and simulations of different kind of universes, and to create these simulations really easily. So the first possibility would state that almost all civilizations in the universe, for one reason or another, don't survive or don't get to the point of technological maturity. So either natural disasters, either they kill themselves, or either maybe there is some reason why making simulations at this kind of way, in this kind of scale, is just not possible. The second possibility would be that civilizations can reach technological maturity and they can make simulations, but for some reason, almost all of them lose interest and choose not to do these simulations. So, one option, we all die and no one can make the simulations, and for some reason, simulations cannot be created. Second option, simulations can be created, but all civilizations just lose interest in it. And the third remaining option is that if none of the other ones are true, then that means that we are very likely living in a simulation. And it might not seem intuitive, but it quite logically follows. So, simulation hypothesis, we are living in a simulation, simulation argument, these three possibilities. And now, this idea of the ancestor simulations. When this argument is proposed, the simulation hypothesis and the simulation argument, what is talked about are ancestor simulations. So basically, us in the future, human civilization in the future, creating simulations of their past, ancestor simulations. And if simulations are possible to create, if it takes just a tiny fraction of computing power and energy resources to create these large-scale simulations, and if there is interest in creating these simulations, even really tiny minority fraction of the future human beings or post-humans, whatever, even if it has tiny interest and it doesn't take much to simulate it, then it's very possible that such simulations will be created. And that would mean that it's very likely that we do live in a simulation. Now, there are a lot of things to keep in mind because there are many logical arguments that sort of really make sense logically, but on a kind of intuitive level, they don't quite feel right because, it doesn't feel like we're in a simulation. But, how would you know that we're living in a simulation? Do we even know what reality is? One thing that people also get confused about are the timescales. Like, it makes absolutely no difference what time it is for us right now. If we are living in a simulation, in the outside universe, in the real ground reality, there might have lived this human species, we as right now, but they have already advanced in the real universe like a million years into the future. So in their universe, it's a million years further, and they created these simulations of this time right now, of us here doing whatever we're doing, and they want to see that. And the interesting thing is, even if like 0.001% of all the species do get to technological maturity, even if only from them like 0.001% are interested in creating them, and if these simulations are easy to create, which it would be easy to create for technologically mature civilization, then these simulations would be created. And what is interesting to think about are the odds. If humanity reaches this future, and this example that I brought up, that maybe we are in a simulation and in the outside universe it might be a million years in the future. If they can create one simulation, let's say they create only one simulation, they create the simulation of us right now. If they do that, then the odds, the likelihood of us living in a simulation, if we somehow knew for some magical physics of law reason that it's only possible to create one simulation, then we would already know, or it would be really likely if you think about it, that it would be 50-50 that we are living in a simulation. But the question is, if you can easily make one simulation, one person, like just right now we have simulation, this game called Universe Sandbox. You can, play around with planets and orbits, and you can create black holes and, throw galaxies at each other and meteoroids at planets and all kinds of fun stuff. You can do that, simulations. And I don't think that all humanity will lose interest in simulations. In fact, I am really interested in simulations. I love games of simulation where you can simulate universes and worlds and physics and all kinds of interactions. It's really fascinating. So I think at least some interest will remain of that. And so when it's possible to create one, why not tens? Why not hundreds? Why not thousands? Why not millions? And a million would be really conservative estimate if we're talking about the technologically mature civilization that might have trillions of minds. And if only 1% of them at some random point in time decide, well, I want to see by myself what the history of the world looks like. I want to see what it was like in the 21st century. Even they have this idea that I expressed really simply, but basically something like that. They're thinking, human future, post-human people has this idea and does this simulation, then the odds of us being in a simulation is, well, one of being in actual reality and 999,999 that we are living in a simulation. And I don't know, people have different kind of reactions to this. Some people are like just not allowing their brains to sort of process this information, and they're like, no, this is wrong. And I do also, in a gut sort of instinct, I suspect that there is something that we do not understand about reality. It's very possible, well, we don't understand most of reality, but it's really possible that there is something about the simulation argument that we're missing. There might be some piece that is really obvious to us in like a few decades or 100 years. Which will make it clear why the simulation argument doesn't make sense. For now, because we are ignorant of the laws of physics and what the limits are, and it's this kind of interesting thing to think about, it does seem quite compelling. If you really allow yourself to put aside your biases and what you want to be true and you don't care about that, you just take the simulation at face value and you just accept what it proposes, and you truly sort of think about it. What does it really mean? If it is possible to create simulations, why wouldn't it be possible? Computing power, if you have the computing power of like an entire planet converted into computing material, you could just use a tiny fraction of it to make, countless amount of simulations of your past history to find out whatever. And then the second option, that they lose interest. It is very possible that maybe we're just being really egotistical and we're thinking that we are super important, and of course the future human beings, post-humans, would be super interested in seeing what life in the 21st century is like. But in fact, that might be so trivial and pretty much pointless that maybe no one would waste their time on it. Maybe it would be kind of ridiculous or absurd. But again, in the simulation argument, it only takes a tiny fraction of future people to be interested in doing this simulation. And then it will follow that we are actually in a simulation. It's weird to think about, could we ever figure out that we are in a simulation? There are definitely some signs that could happen that would make it kind of clear that we are a simulation, like if you see some floating glowing boxes that, have some written code on it or something like that, or some obvious glitches happening or something like that. But so far, one of the things in a weird kind of way that's always amazed me is how consistent reality is. How persistent it is. Sometimes it's weird to wake up and you're like, the world is still here. That is odd to me, and it all definitely does seem real. One thing to think about is that if we are in a simulation, then, what is the reality above us? Is that the ground reality or not? Because a way how we could go, this is, vastly oversimplified, but basically this is the main sort of universe where the actual simulation would begin. Then, it creates this sort of simulation universe of their ancestors, their past, and they make simulations, and then they can 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 make simulations. And essentially, of course, this is oversimplifying. This is saying that one universe will only make one simulation, which is incredible underestimation if it is possible to create simulations. And currently, there is no good reason to think that it wouldn't be possible to create simulations. There are some arguments that say that it would take just incredibly absurd amounts of computing power to create the simulations, but the only thing you need to do, you don't need to simulate every quark and every atom and every single physical interaction. You only need to simulate the human minds. You only need to simulate the minds, the brains of people. And we definitely would have enough computing capacity for that as a technologically advanced civilization. So it's not like you need to actually simulate, the entire world. You only need to simulate what these beings are experiencing and, sort of making sure that all of their experiences are coherent and there's no discrepancies between what people are observing and experiencing. But with this sort of example, it's interesting to think that if we in the distant future or near future, depending on how quickly our technology will advance, if we get to a point where we can create the simulation, we think that, we're able to create the simulation, but we try to make the simulation, and then for some reason it turns out that we cannot run the simulation. That would be a sign that we might be in a simulation, because the idea of why I drew this cryptic, weird sort of image is that if there truly is one parent universe that gives rise to simulations and then simulations and simulations, all of the following simulations all draw their computing power from the parent universe. And at one point, it does not have infinite computing power. At one point, there is some point where no more simulations can be created. I'm kind of on and off with this idea. I have moments where I think that I wouldn't be surprised if, we somehow found out this was a simulation. There are moments where it's like, where you understand that reality is just so strange. That doesn't mean it's a simulation, but, it truly is bizarre, the reality we live in. And then other moments, like I spoke briefly before, is that maybe it's a really silly argument and we're missing some really important piece of why it doesn't make sense to think that we live in a simulation. It might become a really absurd idea, like one of these things that people used to think that we live in a simulation. It can be something ridiculous like that. And also, it is very possible, it is possible that we are actual human beings in a physical universe, and we're one of the first human beings or first intelligent life in the universe. And what a responsibility and interesting thing that would be if that would actually be the case. So this is just a brief overview of what an ancestor simulation is and a bit about the simulation hypothesis and simulation arguments. So hope this was interesting in some way. If you have any thoughts, please share them in the comments. And of course, thank you so much for watching and take care.